Welcome back to Breakout 2. Our next talk is by Mohit Gupta and Philipov on one extra large cloud assessment, please. Why testing at scale needs a different approach. I would like to thank our sponsor, Altered Security. Altered Security pioneered affordable red team labs and have trained more than 30,000 InfoSec professionals from more than 130 countries across the globe. Their hands-on certifications are industry recognized and are very popular with professionals and organizations to demonstrate the skills. If you have any questions at the end of the session, we'll have about 5 minutes for that. Please welcome Christian and Mohit.
Hello, welcome to our talk, 1XL Cloud Assessment, please. In this talk, we're basically going to be talking about testing cloud environments, of large-scale cloud environments, and how the approaches of that need to be kind of different compared to what most people typically do. To start, a bit of a disclaimer, this is for like all types of cloud providers. It's not specific to AWS, Azure, GCP, whatever. We'll probably use terminology related to one of them as part of this, just because it's what we're used to, but the same principles kind of apply to others, so don't let that get in the way. So to get started, I thought I'd do a quick exercise in the room. So does everyone mind raising their hands? Awesome. Keep your hands up, but basically we're going to be seeing how many accounts you guys own or manage or whatever. So if you have at least one, I'd hope, otherwise you're probably at the wrong conference. You keep your hands up if it's more than 5, more than 10, 100, 500, 1,000, 5,000. All right. So we definitely did have people above the 1,000 range. So you can kind of see where this kind of approach or this kind of discussion needs to happen, because we definitely do have clients in that range.
The practicalities of obviously operating in a business and organization that has that amount of just environments, different work streams, different application teams that need their own kind of access and environment to just operate and do whatever is necessary to actually generate value for the business, it ends up creating this kind of sprawling structure in terms of everybody has their own account, which is all great for the application teams to develop what they need to do, but then obviously there's the point about how do we actually go about securing this. Now, obviously, as part of that, they might reach out to internal teams to do some sort of kind of security review or to an external vendor or some combination of kind of commercial tooling that you've got available. But one aspect that needs to be obviously considered in a lot of this that everybody's going to be familiar with is budget. Unfortunately, that's something that everybody will need to play around with, and it's just the reality of the situation that, especially for large organizations, you do need to actually make effective use of that budget. So we're going to talk about some approaches that we've had success with of trying to get good security testing done across a whole organization and try and kind of help balance that out so that it's an effective use of money. But before that, a quick word from our sponsor. And anyway, no, I'm joking. So we've got with me Mohit Gupta. He's a principal security consultant at WithSecure. He's done a lot of various AWS and Kubernetes related work. You might know him as Skybound. And also, one of his calls to fame is that he spent approximately 6 days a week playing D&D for a good few months.
And Chris over here, it's going to be the other guy talking. He is a principal security consultant here with WithSecure as well. And he's our chief meme officer. And basically what that means is he's really, really good at making good, solid memes. To the point where internally, whenever we need a meme of anything, celebrating something, making fun of something, Chris is usually the guy we go to. He's also stuck in Azure land. He has played around with some GCP, but he spends most of his time playing with Azure. So what are we going to be talking about today? So the agenda is pretty simple. Hopefully it's not too much. We'll start with the current status quo of cloud environments. Hopefully it's not too new to people in this room. We'll then move to how currently a lot of people assess their cloud workloads. And then we'll talk about why that may not work for large cloud estates. And then we'll move to what our proposed alternatives are, how we've had success with them, their pros and cons, and then it'll be a kind of an open question to the community as a whole on, is this good? Is there better options, or what's the way forward?
So as we all know over here, cloud adoption is obviously just continuing on growing. Like in the end, there are more and more workloads that are being moved from on-premise environments to cloud, or completely kind of greenfield projects that are being built in a cloud environment. So in the end, we've got this kind of problem that's going to continue on increasing, which is that organizations are just going to get into bigger and bigger environments that they need to go about and try and secure. There's also another factor about it, which is with that scale, there's also complexity that comes out of it. Obviously, cloud providers are very eager to provide services that are tailored to specific use cases. And so organizations make use of all sorts of services, platform as a service solutions, as well as kind of software as a service solutions that they end up kind of integrating as part of their business to satisfy some specific business need, which is all great and all. But then obviously this ends up adding that complexity and making the actual attack surface that somebody that's attempting to actually target you will look at. Like they won't stop at like just one specific service, they'll look at everything. So what do we do then? Given this complexity, given this scale, like how do we go about like approaching this from a security perspective to try and mitigate what an attacker can do against the environment? And so let's discuss some approaches that are currently being used.
So if we look at what's currently being done, usually when clients come to us saying, hey, we have this environment or this application, can you look at it? It usually starts off from an application team for the larger organizations where they've deployed an application in a cloud environment, and they've come to us, and so we're looking at the application as well as the underlying infrastructure. But that underlying infrastructure is only within their bubble of influence, let's say. So, you know, if this is a large organization with hundreds of app teams or 100 applications, then it's not going to cover the entire estate. This is only going to cover what's needed for that. And even then, it won't cover everything like CI/CD and so on and so forth. So it's very limited in scope. We won't go into much detail on the approaches and the methodologies for this. If you are interested in that, Lizzie's done an amazing talk yesterday about that kind of stuff. So if you are interested, definitely do recommend reading that. And we can't, you know, if we are talking about current approaches, we also should talk about what we call pen test classic. This is where, you know, security testers have come from a more on-premise Windows AD estate where they're used to like Nmap scans and finding vulnerabilities, and they kind of shift this methodology into the cloud. What this means is, you know, they focus on scanning things within cloud environments, maybe scanning an external perimeter for a cloud, trying to find initial access points, which can provide value to a client, not saying it can't. How much value can be debatable, though. So now we kind of know, you know, what kind of methodologies people currently follow. What is the problem with just scaling this up and doing it, you know, however many times we need? And so if we consider the condition where there's hundreds of accounts we need to do, which is just at 100, considering people have had 1,000 accounts just in this room itself, it's not too much of an ask. For a single account, we may be testing for like 3-4 days. For hundreds of accounts, you're looking at a year at that point of testing, which is a significant hit to your budget, significant hit to effort, and it might not even fully cover everything. Not only that, when you have accounts of that size, estates of that size, there's probably going to be some sort of centralized security that is affecting the security posture of all of those individual things, which you might not see. So there'll probably be a centralized security account. They'll probably have something like guard duty enabled. There'll probably be like service control policies enforcing some security mandates throughout the estate. And there'll probably also be like commercial security products helping out things like CSPM, CNAPs, and so on and so forth.
So, full disclaimer, obviously, I think one approach that obviously organizations try to use to tackle this issue is automation. Automation is great, you know, everybody loves it over here, but even automation have its limits, and this isn't necessarily about whether or not like a given tool, and in this context, let's just start off with open source tooling. Like there are a lot of really great open source tools out there. There are a lot of really clever people trying to kind of solve different problems within the industry. However, fundamentally, even good tooling has its limits. There are some problems that are just computationally difficult to solve. And one classic example is the stuff that Mohit and Nick presented in 2022 around identity and access management in AWS. Like you have to take like more creative approaches with stuff like SMT solvers to try and solve the fundamental question of can X do Y and where? like ultimately these are just difficult problems. It's not just about like scaling it up with automation that will magically go and save it, like just solve the whole situation. There's also the point about in large estates that you need to focus down kind of what you're looking at so that you can actually get results that you can act upon in a reasonable time frame. Obviously, if you're looking at an estate that's like 1,000 accounts, maybe multiple AWS organizations, getting some actual practical outcomes out of it to go about and try and remediate some of these risks is a difficult thing, even with like good tooling. And then there's to address another elephant in the room is obviously there are a lot of really, really good commercial solutions out there. Obviously, they can include all sorts of automatic automatic misconfiguration checking, automatic remediation, as well as capabilities to export data and perform queries against it. So you can get a lot of this information via these tools and be presented to it in a nice kind of single platform that you can use. And obviously, if you've got the budget for them, then absolutely do use them. They are really good and they will help out with your overall security. However, one key point, and obviously this, just to make it clear, this isn't because of like any individuals involved in this. There are a lot of really, really, really good, talented engineers, people with knowledge working on these solutions, but fundamentally each tool is only going to be able to do as much as it's been built for. Like it can't, AI aside, obviously a tool can't magically start knowing how to do stuff that it's not been designed for. Use cases need to be implemented. New research that has been done from the community needs to be integrated. Like there's always going to be a point at which an automated tool won't be able to as quickly be able to look at something new and figure out how to go about applying security principles to it. It does require a bit of a human element does absolutely help out here, because if you encounter something new and you don't know about it, you can go and play around with it, do some research really quickly, try and figure out how would you go about trying to attack this if you are interested as an attacker. As well as specific objectives that you might have as an organization or specific concerns as well. You do need some prior knowledge, as well as time to use these tools effectively to get good outcomes out of that in a reasonable time. There's the same problem that you've got with the open source tooling, is that you just need that kind of time investment to go and deal with it. An important thing to mention is that this isn't just applicable to any small or medium-sized companies. There are a lot of really big enterprises that have a lot of budget to spend on security. They have a lot of commercial tooling that is really top-notch, but then that doesn't mean that you are secure by default. As we've seen over the last towards the end of last year, one really good example is with Okta, where their perimeter doesn't necessarily stop within their corporate estate purely. There is also the factor where an employee that might have accidentally committed a corporate password to their personal kind of password manager on their browser, and then an attacker compromises that to gain access to an internal system, to then get access to a supporting system, to then pivot into another company. Ends up now you've got the situation where your perimeter doesn't stop with you yourself, but also with the products and other services that you work with. And then another really good one out of the end of last year is the Midnight Blizzard attack against Microsoft, where it showcases that even production assets, even if let's assume that you've done testing, you've tried to secure them and harden that as much as possible, there might be still ways that you can move from development assets into production and then get access that way to very sensitive data. Your perimeter is a complex thing in the end. It's not just what you usually think about it, what you usually assume that it is. It can end up being a combination of many different factors. And so, what do we actually want then in order to secure our environments?
Yeah, so now we've kind of looked at some of the background. If we want to actually do a good test of a large-scale cloud assessment, what do we actually want to get out of it? And I think there are two main areas we want to do. The first is we actually want to focus on real-world impact. And by real-world impact, I mean things that actually affect the business. So things that are critical to the business, things like the business data, credit card data, whatever the business does, that's kind of the critical crown jewels for this environment. So that's where we should be focusing on its security posture, because that's the main thing that matters. And the second thing we want to do is make sure that we cover everything's related to that cloud estate. So not only the resources deployed in that cloud environment, but what kind of federation do they use for identity management, what kind of CI/CD they use, how all of that is kind of connected, all of that actually matters. And so with that kind of information, we can start building some sort of attack methodology or testing methodologies to do this assessment. And so the first thing we kind of need to do is figure out what real-world objectives, what kind of critical assets do this organization have that we want to focus on and make sure that they're secure. And so that's going to be heavy discussions with the client to figure out what they are, and then we can agree with them, these are our critical assets. These are the bits that we care about for this engagement. For example, let's say it's a database full of credit card information, where leaking that is going to be massively damage to that client. Once we've done that, we can then start snapshotting the current environment. Now, there are two thoughts on this. One is we can snapshot, the other is we just query the AWS or Azure APIs when we need information. We tend to prefer just snapshotting it because it gives us a nice point-in-time snapshot of what things are. Cloud environments tend to change over time, and so just because you create something on one day doesn't mean the next day is going to be different, and we don't know how that's going to change things. Whereas at least if it's snapshotted, we can say at this point in time, it was like this, and if we need to do a delta change, we can do that and say, all right, this role just got renamed to this new role in the current version, or whatever it may be. But having that snapshot helps, as well as it lets us grep through that data in a lot more quicker manner. And then once we've done that, we can start reviewing the access management to those resources. And not only the central database that we're talking about, but everything that can interact with it, right? So let's say this is like a MySQL database in an environment. Let's say the credentials are stored in HashiCorp Vault. There's an EC2 with an application running that accesses it. All of those things are kind of critical to the security of that database. So all of those things we need to look into and make sure it's secure or has approved access patterns. This also extends to the entire organization, right? So it's not only the account where this application is deployed, it's accounts throughout the entire organization. What roles can access the roles in other accounts? So Alexi, who's sitting right there, has released a tool and did some research on this, and the tool's called IamGraph, which basically takes get account authorization details from throughout the organization and then generates a graph of roles in which account can assume which roles in which other accounts. So it gets you a nice route to see, all right, these roles in staging can get to these roles in production, which we have found on multiple client engagements, whereas why do these roles have access, which has been set up for various legacy reasons. There's also been a case where we were testing a cloud environment, and there was role assumptions to highly privileged production roles coming from an account not within the organization that we could see. And at that point, that's a very big red flag. And further discussing with the client, it's because it was an account that was originally within the organization, but for various reasons had left the organization, and that kind of relationship or that trust relationship was just forgotten about. But that created a nice, easy backdoor into the environment, which was absolutely critical. And then we can't only just focus on the cloud resources, like we said earlier. We want to focus on other areas as well, like CI/CD and identity providers. In the case of CI/CD, when we're doing testing normally, CI/CD is not normally added to the scope of testing. And when it is added to the scope of testing, it's kind of done in its own bubble. So we don't see how that interacts with the overall estate. So adding it to the scope for this allows us to better analyze its impact to the estate when doing that kind of testing. And identity providers, I'm sure you can all kind of guess, especially with Chris's example of how Okta's thing affected those breaches. So what are the pros and cons of this? So we'll start with the cons, because there's always cons with every approach. And the first thing is it doesn't test everything. If you're after compliance from 100% coverage, this just does not do that. If you want that, you're going to have to do that year-long's worth of testing where we go through literally every single account. So this does not provide value on that. It also needs stakeholder buy-in, like senior stakeholder buy-in. We are trying to get access to the entire estate, the root account, all the production accounts, staging accounts, dev accounts, any identity providers, secret management solutions, whatever. All of that stuff is going to be spread out across the team, and so we need enough of a buy-in that we can get access to everything we need. And not only access to the resources, access to the engineers, the SMEs. As Lizzie was mentioning yesterday, there's a lot of context with these environments, and a lot of which we don't have. And so to help us to get that environment context, we kind of need to talk to the engineers, we need to talk to the SMEs. So while we can reduce the testing time, it also adds extra time from the engineers aren't working on the latest release or whatever. They're spending quite a bit of time talking with us and giving us the context we need so we can come up with valid attack paths and try to find good attacks. But there are pros in this. So the fact that we don't test everything is not only a con, but it's also a pro. Because we're not going to be spending a year testing this. It's going to be a couple of weeks. And the findings you get out of that are going to be a lot more impactful. So for a lot less money, we're getting a lot better results. At least impactful in the sense of it's going to matter to the business. It's going to be on its critical assets and not just, oh, look, your EBS volume's not encrypted. You're going to fail this compliance check. Different levels of value here. And then finally, it also provides a different perspective. When we're looking at applications individually, we're very scoped down to what we're looking at, and we're coming in from the perspective of an application. Whereas taking a top-down approach takes a completely different view of the environment and finds connections that wouldn't normally be found when looking at an application, which we can try to find this time, and find those issues and that normally wouldn't be raised.
So just to, I guess, summarize the overall talk and what we're trying to convey here is that fundamentally we think that this approach is very useful because it's more kind of objective-driven testing that tries to focus on the entire estate, looking at your overall attack surface, not just kind of specific components that belong to specific teams. And the idea here is that we focus on finding these impactful findings to the broader business, not necessarily trying to achieve 100% coverage of what an individual team might own for like some regulatory or compliance reasonings. And as kind of mentioned at the beginning of the talk, like we think that this is useful to the broader industry. And so the question back to you, the audience, is, what do people think about this approach? Do you think that this is reasonably something that organizations should be kind of doing more often within kind of their own internal teams, working with vendors in general, just to make sure that we are actually improving the security posture of our environments, and we try and tackle some of these issues that attackers clearly take advantage of, even with large enterprises, to try and kind of plug these holes as much as we can. Yeah, thank you.
Questions in the room?
Could you speak to some of the challenges that you face in trying to get the right, like, paths or impact that you're looking for when you have such a wide scope, but then like a very focused objective you're trying to hit?
So to an extent, kind of from my perspective, there are a couple of challenges, one of which is exactly the agreement of what is allowed to do, which is where the point of like the senior stakeholder buy-in does come into play. There are some very complex organizational structures, especially with larger enterprises that would have this level of kind of scale in terms of different environments. And so being able to kind of break into these silos and get the actual permission to look at different things is like one of the big challenges, absolutely. And that's where the example for CI/CD that Mohit mentioned is often a complex one to try and include, because a lot of organizations do acknowledge it is a critical part of their overall infrastructure, but at the same time, it usually lies with a specific team outside of different kind of applications that might own it, different work streams. And then there's also the point about it being so critical that people are afraid to actually properly kind of poke at it from a security perspective. And so there is that kind of finding the balance between kind of alleviating, I guess, stakeholder worry in regards to kind of what specific activities would be done, and at the same time still being able to actually look at it objectively and try and spot some of these issues with how pipelines are set up, to be able to actually do something about it before an attacker actually does, when they eventually do compromise a developer.
Yeah, so objectivity versus communication. Thank you, and thank you for the talk.
Oh, thank you.
Anyone else in the room?
Hey, thanks for the talk. I was curious as to how you prep customers or some sort of tactics you do to maximize meeting time with them and limit unnecessary time wasting when you're in this process of meeting with the SMEs and gathering that information?
It is super hard.
Yeah.
A lot of it's come from, like, we've built relationships with clients with various teams that helps us. They trust us more when we say we need to chat with these people, and they can try to, get that in. One of the annoying things is balancing, all right, it's hard to know who to talk with, so it's balancing, do we just book their time out the entire time, or do we try to, pull them in last minute to various calls? It varies. Sometimes it's easier just booking the time out with all of them, and if they have that free time, they can, revert to their work. Sometimes clients prefer that we try to get them last minute, at which point it's like, all right, we can't get them today, but tomorrow morning they'll be free, kind of thing. So it's a hard problem. I don't think it's not an easy one to solve because of the variability in who we need to talk to and when to get the context we need.
Thanks. One more round of applause for Christian and Mohit.